Hello and welcome to Lessons in History. The LO today is, what was the impact of the Renaissance on Britain? We will look at what the Renaissance was and what came from it. Key individuals will be shown to have made great contributions to society, consequently helping medical advancement. The trio of Vesalius, Pare and Harvey will be looked at for their own unique contributions and drawing light to the errors made by Galen. Timestamps are on the screen to jump to the topical person you are finding most tricky. The Renaissance began in the towns and streets of Italy and wildly spread across Europe. Places like Florence and Venice thrived with a booming trade economy. With individuals making large profits, those in positions of high status began to ask for more from craftsmen and artisans. This extra money was therefore spent in areas such as arts and science. Many individuals were able to make great discoveries and progress in multiple fields. It is key to note that without these individuals making the discoveries and progress, people would still be thinking like that in the Middle Ages. It was the beginning of what became known as the scientific method and led to many eminent people to question the beliefs of Galen and other classical scholars. This was to have a profound impact on many aspects of life, including health and the way diseases were diagnosed and treated. Remember, you are not going to be asked about inventors, but certainly you can use their inventions and how they influence medical development. Without any doubt, the number one invention that you need to be aware of is the printing press. Up there with the wheel, the printing press is arguably one of the greatest inventions in the history of human civilization. Developed by German Johannes Gutenberg in 1440 and brought to England by William Caxton in 1476, the printing press allowed for the mass creation of documents rather than the traditionally slow and laborious method of having a single monk write them by hand. This was vital, as it meant new ideas could spread across Europe from 1440 with greater ease. Just think, more people with access to books means greater numbers of people thinking and questioning social norms, typically those norms which are enforced by the church. Artists in this time period, such as Michelangelo, designed and painted the Sistine Chapel in Rome, exemplifying new techniques and methods in art had rapidly developed. Now shading, depth and perspective were all used to help create a more realistic image. Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, for instance, uses mathematics so that no matter where you view the painting, she is always making eye contact with you. This knowledge of scientific principles allowed for increased realism in drawings. Da Vinci was also famous for his drawings of the human fetus. Realistic drawings such as this helped doctors to progress in finding out more about how the body worked. Explorers made key discoveries of distant lands during the Renaissance. Columbus in 1492 discovered North America for Europeans, whilst looking for a quicker route to India. Connection to medicine, you might ask? Well, just think about all of them diseases carried by the sailors, in addition to the spread of ideas. Important discoveries were made in the field of astronomy, not astrology, as we looked at in our last video. Go watch my video on medicine standing still for that. The Polish astronomer Copernicus, or Copernic, used maths and logic to show that the Earth and other planets moved around the Sun, rejecting the Christian Church's view, held in the Middle Ages, that the Earth was at the centre of the universe simply because man was special. Copernicus's theory about the universe was later proved by Galileo, who used a telescope which had been invented in 1608 by Hans Lippershey to prove the theory that the Earth moves around the Sun, not the other way around. You might be thinking, well, what's this got to do with medicine and health? Well, it's the principle of the age, not to accept what they were told, but the desire to ask questions, find evidence for themselves, and experiment with new ideas. The scientific method had well and truly been born. Some even began to question the great works of Hippocrates and Galen. The widely travelled Swiss physician Paracelsus in 1527 created controversy by rejecting the old ideas advocating, for example, that a wound should be allowed to drain itself freely of pus and fluids rather than being bound tightly or cauterized. He wrote his ideas down in his controversial book De Medicina. But there were three individuals that stood above the rest in the Renaissance. Andreas Vesalius. It seems sensible that the best way to understand the human body is to open one up, preferably a newly dead body, a healthy one that has died by accident or execution. so that its innards are not distorted by disease. Sensible indeed, since anatomy, or the study of the body's fabric or structure, is a cornerstone of medicine. In the early 16th century, however, an obstacle stood in the way of this idea. Indeed, it had stood there for 13 centuries, in the person of Galen. Luckily for medical progress, Andreas Vesalius had never really fallen under Galen's spell, and he is often credited as the founder of modern scientific anatomy. Initially an art student with a flair for illustrations, Vesalius left his home of Belgium to study medicine in Paris, where he read the works of Galen. Pleased he was not. Vesalius's innovation was essentially to record what he saw with his own eyes in the form of detailed illustrations that were faithful to the specimens before him, rather than lying on old renderings. Using his drawing skills and taking advice from professional artists, Vesalius built up a collection of accurate and skillfully executed illustrations. Fascinated by medicine, and by Vesalius's approach in particular, a local judge in Padua, Italy, where Vesalius worked at the university, permitted him to use the corpses of executed criminals for his autopsies. As a result, Vesalius soon had numerous corpses in various stages of dissection, taking up space in his university rooms, including his personal quarters. Odd. He either loved his job too much like yours truly, or just wanted to be correct. Ultimately, this led him to correcting Galen's mistakes. His discoveries included that men and women have the same number of ribs, unlike the Christian belief that Eve was created from one of Adam's ribs, therefore men having one less rib. Side note, even I thought this to be true until year 10, until I asked my science teacher. Thanks, Mum and Dad. Vesalius showed that the lower jaw is a single bone, not two, an error derived from dog anatomy. And the breastbone or sternum has 3 parts, not 7, an error derived from monkey anatomy, as after all, Galen's experiments were conducted on animals, not humans. Andreas Vesalius recorded his discoveries in the classic text On the Fabric of the Human Body, published in 1543. With the printing press, the text was widely read and distributed, which began to challenge the mistakes made by Galen and the Christian Church. Take things a step further and state to the examiner how On the Fabric of the Human Body allowed doctors for themselves to follow along and learn correctly rather than being brainwashed by the previous mistakes laid down by Galen and perpetuated by the Christian Church. Pare and the Barber surgeons. The barber surgeons of medieval Europe practiced a curious mix of hair cutting and shaving, with lice and flea removal often thrown in for free. Also, removal of warts and similar blemishes, perhaps a few tooth pullings, the always popular bloodletting by leech, and cauterizing of open wounds by pouring on boiling oil, plus emergency limb amputation, usually in hellish battlefield conditions. Ambrose Pare was schooled in all of these procedures, but he was also a pioneer who led a revolution in surgery, one that greatly eased pain and suffering, promoted healing, and vastly improved prospects for the seriously wounded. Before Pare, individuals such as Hugh of Lucca and his son Theodoric were famous surgeons who wrote a book in 1267 criticising the common view that pus was needed for a wound to heal. They used wine on wounds to reduce the chances of infection and had new methods of reducing arrow injuries. Despite being ahead of their time, their ideas about preventing infection went against Hippocratic advice and did not become popular. John of Ardern was the most famous surgeon in England. His surgical manual, Practica, of 1376, contained illustrations of his operations and instruments. It was based on Greek and Arab knowledge and his own experiences of wards in the 100 Years' War between England and France. He used opium and henbane to dull pain. He charged a large fee for an operation he developed to treat an anal abscess, a condition common in knights who spent long periods on horseback. In 1368, he tried to separate the surgeons from lower-class barbers by forming a work association called the Guild of Surgeons within the City of London. However, it wasn't until the developments made by Ambrose Pare that surgeons started to become more respected. Pare trained in Paris before becoming a surgeon in the French army, and became exposed to horrific battle wounds, much like that of Galen in the Colosseum. At the Siege of Milan in 1536, he ran out of hot oil for cauterizing wounds. With no oil, he made up a mixture of egg yolk, turpentine, and rose oil to dress raw wounds. It was much less painful and, as he discovered the next morning, much more effective at helping healing. I think of this as an oily and runny version of Savlon. Don't use that in your exam. Pare introduced another revolutionary technique. Many soldiers with gruesomely extensive limb damage underwent rapid amputation, but then bled profusely and died from medical shock brought on by blood loss. This could occur even after attempts to sear and seal the amputation wound using cauterization with a red-hot iron. Acutely observant, Pare saw that most of the blood gushed from one or two severed arteries at the stump, rather than the general tissue such as muscle. So he tried tying ligatures or tight cords adjacent to the proposed amputation site. It worked. Upon amputation, the restricted artery no longer spurted high-pressure blood from the stump. For this, think of dental floss or silk threads being used to tie off blood vessels to stop the bleed. A genius idea in one regard, as it reduced the chance of death from shock. But with a lack of knowledge of germs, this did introduce infection into the body. Experimentation and rational deduction also continued to fascinate Pare. He had long been suspicious of the so-called Bezoar stone, masses of material extracted from stomachs or digestive tracts of humans and animals. Just think all of the things inside your stomach that does not get digested and just builds up over time. According to legend, these stones had medicinal properties and were in particular an antidote to all manner of poisons. In 1567, an opportunity arose to test this notion. A thief at the royal court was sentenced to death by hanging. He had agreed to take poison instead, provided he could take a Bezoar stone in preparation. If he survived, he would be freed. Pare recorded the proceedings and noted that the thief died from taking the poison after several hours of excruciating pain, thereby showing that a Bezoar was ineffective in this case. Quackery and superstition had become to be questioned. Later, he had developed artificial limbs for those who had lost a hand or leg due to their wounds. His time as an army surgeon allowed Pare to observe his patients and treat them more effectively. He published his experiences in a book called A Treatise or a Paper on Surgery in 1564, becoming famous across England and Europe. He influenced other surgeons, such as the English surgeon William Close, doctor to Queen Elizabeth I. Harvey and blood circulation. Since ancient times, blood has been regarded as the very stuff of human existence, a red liquid that, as it leaked away, took life with it. Likewise, the heart has always been at the centre of our ideas about character. Today, to have a heart means to be generous and forgiving. Perhaps no other part of the body has been subject to so much superstition, nor had their workings guessed at so many times. The simple fact that the heart pumps blood around the body was not discovered until the 17th century. The breakthrough came in the 1620s, when English physician William Harvey performed experiments that overturned centuries of guesswork about veins, arteries, and the workings of the human heart. Galen appreciated that there were two sets of blood vessels, arteries and veins, but he regarded them as distinct systems. With no microscope, he had no knowledge of capillaries in the tissues that linked the two. The heart's job, according to Galen, was to mix blood that came into its right side from the liver with air from the lungs. Blood impurities were removed in the heart and returned to the lungs, where they were breathed out, while the clean blood returned to the liver. Enter William Harvey. An enthusiastic demonstrator and experimentalist, Harvey reputedly dissected the bodies both of his father and sister. His historic publication on the motion of the heart and blood was the result of more than 20 years of deliberate, detailed, step-by-step, occasionally obsessive dissections, observations, and experiments on over 60 different species of dead and living animals. Cold-blooded creatures like frogs and reptiles were particularly useful to Harvey because the motions of their heart and pulsating vessels were generally slower and easier to follow than those of warm-blooded birds or mammals. His work on cold-blooded amphibians allowed him to see blood pumping around the body, and his most famous experiment described in his book showed blood moving in a patient's forearm. With this experiment, he was able to show convincingly that the heart worked as a pump and that blood flowed in a one-way system around the body. He was also able to show that Galen's belief that the liver, not the heart, was the centre of the human body was completely wrong. Galen had believed that the liver made new blood to replace that lost around the body. Harvey's work on the circulation of the blood proved that this was wrong, and also challenged the idea of bleeding as a cure. If Harvey was right, then it was impossible for the body to have too much blood. One of Harvey's key pieces of evidence was a series of simple calculations involving the quantity of blood. He estimated how much blood was ejected by a heartbeat and multiplied this by the heart rate. Since the blood could not return to the heart because of the valve system, it must be freshly and continuously made. However, and like all three of the individuals we have looked at, no practical alternatives or treatments were offered. These three simply expanded medical knowledge which would be built upon by later individuals such as John Hunter. Watch out for him in an upcoming video. The Renaissance, therefore, was a time of both change and continuity. Change in the terms of new ideas were being created, but continuity in the regard that no new treatments were offered. Thanks for making it to the end. I've put some practice questions up should you wish to give these a go. Leave any questions you have in the comments if you are unsure of any of the content and what you would like to see next. Remember, these videos are here for your benefit, so if you liked the video, you know what to do, and if you didn't, well then just tell me how I may make them better. Do you think the Renaissance was a time of great change or continuity? Why did treatments such as bloodletting continue? I'd be curious to hear what you think in the comments. Don't forget to hit subscribe out of respect for all the animals that William Harvey killed in his experiments. Thanks for watching Lessons in History, and I'll see you in the next video.